I was taking 60 pills a day, 20 for breakfast, 20 for lunch, 20 for dinner, to get that same little feeling of pretending everything is okay. I started smoking heroin, and it was 11 months from that moment that I Googled how to smoke heroin to losing everything in my life. He grabbed my arm very hard, and he said, squeezed up my upper arm really hard, and he said, "You will never see your son again. You should not be anyone's mother." And in that moment, I 100% agreed with him. But she's like, are there any book club you want in particular? And I was like, well, which ones have you reached out? We did this back and forth, and I was like, well, you know which one I want. And then Oprah pops up on the Zoom. And she says, "Which one, Lara?"
Welcome back to the Seano Show. I'm your host, Seano McFarland. Woo-hoo! Today's guest has a story that reads like a thriller, hits like a gun punch, and uplifts like a redemption anthem. She's a literary force, ghostwriting for major names and earning multiple New York Times bestsellers. But before that, she was a suburban soccer mom living a secret double life as a heroin addict, a convicted felon, eventually an inmate in county jail. Her memoir, The Many Lives of Mama Love, doesn't just reveal how she survived. It shows how she turned pain into purpose, shame into strength, and chaos into creativity. Please welcome to the show, Lara Love Hardin. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
I believe in manifestation. I think you do too. I want to talk about that a little bit later. So I manifested this episode with you because you are a very special human being. You're my kind of junkie. You're my kind of grifter, and you're my kind of redemption story. Like, I would rob banks with you. We would be a great team.
I use my powers for good now, but if I didn't, I would Bonnie and Clyde with you for sure.
Let's talk about young Lara. I got a sense, like so many addicts, myself included, growing up, profound loneliness.
That like hacks 30 years of therapy right there.
Books had a great impact on you when you were little.
Yeah, I mean, the first line of my book is reading was my first addiction. And,
right.
My family was chaotic and quiet, if that makes sense. Like, it was chaos and nobody talked about it. And so my sort of retreat from family life and the chaos and undiagnosed, like, alcoholism and addiction around me that no one talked about way back when, was to just escape into books. And so I started reading really young, and I read, with a desperation, like, what books are my next fix? Like, how, like, there's never enough books, right? And so I remember just like hiding in my closet is basically what I did. And I just read book after book after book. And in books, like, people made sense to me in books, right? Even if they were sad stories, there was like clear motivations. There's often happy endings. Like, I just loved books. And that's, often a gateway drug to writing. So that's how my trajectory started really young, reading and writing.
And during that time, if there's one, I know there's many, what book had the greatest impact on you when you were little?
I mean, this is going to sound very strange, but I remember in first grade, I read Gone with the Wind twice. And I loved that book just because it was 1,100 pages long. I didn't understand any of it. But I read a lot of, when I was really young, I read a lot of like books about kids, like in California. I grew up in Massachusetts, and their biggest problem was like the orange grove was going to freeze. I don't know. It was just a lot of simple lives books, like a lot of Beverly Cleary and Nancy Drew, and then I got into like the romance, Nora Roberts, and it was like, oh, look, there's happily ever afters out there, all of that. So, and I read anything and everything I could get my hands on.
Right. So you were just able to disappear in some of these characters.
Mm-hmm. And in some of these lives.
So why don't we go to this place? I mean, there's so much I want to talk to you about. Why don't we just start your addiction path, kind of where it started and then where it culminated with the sheriffs coming to get you. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So I thought I could out-educate and what afflicted my family. Like, I knew there was a lot of drinking and drugs. And I said that would never be me. And so I always like to say, like, I was a late bloomer to addiction and then an overachiever, right? And so I held it off. I mean, I'm kind of an overachiever for good or for bad, but when I do something, but I kind of held it off. I went straight from high school to college, 3,000 miles away from home. I went out to California. I went straight from college to graduate school. I went straight in graduate school to having 3 boys in 4.5 years. And it was really only, I was mid-20s, and, I was desperate to have sort of the happily, like Leave It to Beaver, for people who are old like me and know who that is. But that kind of family, right? And I growing up, I thought everyone else had a normal family. Like, I thought I was just, like the terminally unique outlier, and everyone else had a normal family, and I wanted that desperately. And so in my first marriage, I had 3 young boys, and my husband was cheating on me. And it was then, throughout every pregnancy, and it was then when I realized, I'm not going to have this happily ever after family. I'm not going to have the white picket fence. And it's, I remember really taking, a prescribed opiate. This is back in the mid 90s, before the crisis was a crisis. And, Vicodin specifically was handed out in blister packs in little like candy dishes at the dentist, at the doctor, everywhere. Try this, try this. And I remember taking one for pain, emotional pain, for the first time, and it lit me up, right? I was like, oh, and mostly what it did is help me pretend I was okay and I was happy. And I, looking back now, I wasn't thinking at the time, but looking back now, I was like, did I have postpartum depression? Like, I read this book by this woman who wrote a whole book about her postpartum depression and drug use. And I was like, do I need to change my villain origin story? Like, I didn't, there was like it really shook me. I was like, wait. But I think, basically I think I was depressed. I would never have admitted that or told anyone that or asked for help, even if I knew I was. But I took that pill and I was suddenly smarter, better, funnier, happier, brighter, more connected to the world. It didn't make me sleepy. It didn't make me nod off. It didn't do any of the things stereotypically people think. The way it reacted to my brain, it was like everything, I could pretend everything was going to be okay, easier. And I loved that feeling. And, I had 3 little boys, and doing laundry and playing Army Guys isn't that exciting, but suddenly it was, and I remember, and then it took 2 to have that feeling. And then it took 3, and then it took 4. And then I got scared. I was like, oh my God, I took 4 pills in one day. And this is not who I am. This is not what I want to do. And by the end of that, to jump ahead, struggling on and off with that for a very, very long time, I was taking 60 pills a day, 20 for breakfast, right, 20 for lunch, 20 for dinner, to get that same little feeling of pretending everything is okay. And then eventually, I did get 6 years clean. I stopped. I had 6 years clean, and I was in a second marriage.
I wanted to ask you, how did you get your 6 years clean? How did you stop then? That was interesting to me. How did you just stop on your own?
Yeah, I went to a lot of meetings. I went to meetings, and I became the poster girl of 12-step meetings. I said all the right things. I didn't do any of the work. I pretended to do the work, but I didn't do it, and I did it at the surface level, right? Got and it. I volunteered, and I hosted parties at my, it was all very still pretending. I think that is my warning sign for me when I'm pretending in any area of my life. But my second husband, I'd met in recovery, and he ended up relapsing, and he brought, I found this sticky brown stuff in the house. I didn't know what it was. And I called a friend, and she's like, that sounds like heroin. And then I had kids in private school, and I remember I was driving to the Montessori school to volunteer in the classroom, and I Googled, how to smoke heroin, at the stoplight. And that's really all it took. That's how, I knew all the right things, ask for help. Oh, I'm thinking of relapsing. It was none of that. It was just proximity and go. And so I started smoking heroin, and it was 11 months from that moment that I Googled how to smoke heroin to losing everything in my life, and the sheriff's coming to my, suburban cul-de-sac to arrest me.
And from that, how long was it from the moment you Googled that to the sheriff show up at your house? How long was that period?
11 months.
In 11 months, you created that much chaos. Because when
Overachiever.
you good. I mean, how many, is this right? 32 felony counts?
Yeah, I pled guilty to 32 felonies.
You're not messing around.
Nope.
Yeah,
I go
yeah.
big. Yeah.
Junkies are very resilient. I mean, we figure out ways. I'm sure that was quite clever, some of the things you were doing.
Well, part of it, it's interesting because it's never like I knew right from wrong. I knew this is actually not who I am at all. Like I'm the most generous person. I'm not going to go into I'll give my neighbors whatever they need, but in that 11 months, it was a level of compulsion and desperation and I'll fix this tomorrow. I'll stop tomorrow. And every day it was like that. This is not who I am. I know right from wrong. I don't like to steal. And, my kids are in private school. And so I was stealing, from basically my friends or the other parents at school. They'd leave their purses in the car and I'd grab some cash or grab a credit card. And, the weird mental gymnastics I did to justify in some ways, like I'm not actually stealing from them, it's the credit card company, or I'm going to only buy groceries and gas with the card I stole from my friend, not really playing that all the way out. Well, that's because all my money is gone for heroin. So it was a miserable, miserable existence that I couldn't stop.
Yeah. There's that great line in 12-Step Recovery. Our old enemy friend rationalization steps in. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So
and I was just smart enough to be really damaging to myself, right? Like
I love it. Oh, I so get it. And I read your book, and I think one of the things that had so many things had such great impact on me is the sheriff comes. You'll walk us through this, obviously. A part of you is relieved, and then he says to you, what about you're saying, what about my children? And he says, I believe this is correct in the book. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. You'll never see your kids again. You're an unfit mother. Something along those lines. Could you walk us through that moment?
Yeah. So, everything was closing in. And, this is 16 years ago. 16 years ago, yesterday, I walked out of jail, actually. Yesterday was was Liberation Day yesterday.
God.
Anniversary.
Happy anniversary. That's incredible.
Thank you. So, everything was closing in. I'm not as clever as I think I am. I'm not a mastermind criminal. And so the sheriff showed up at my house. I had 4 boys, 1 was in junior high, 2 in high school. And then my youngest, Caden, was close to turning 4. And he was the only one home when the sheriffs came. And they came in to arrest me and my husband at the time. And I was relieved that it was over. And then suddenly I'm in handcuffs and I was asking the sheriff, let me call someone to get my son. Let me call someone. And he didn't do that. He called Child Protective Services. And I think that moment when my son, who'd just been he was watching Wonder Pets. I'll never, I hear that tune and it's just PTSD. He's watching this cartoon with the stuffed animals and he'd never been a night away from me. And basically strangers came in the house to take them and he goes running to me for comfort and my hands are handcuffed behind my back and strangers are pulling him out of the house. And, I've had nightmares about that. It's only, maybe up until 15 years later, it's only the last year probably I can tell that story without crying now. But it was that moment where I was like, oh, I can't, there's no fixing this tomorrow. There's no, this is going to be irreparable. This is that moment where it's just like a before and after, a demarcation line, this, everything before and now what's after. And so I was in the back of the sheriff's car and, I was crying the whole way, where are they taking my son? What can they do? And I'd said to my son, it's okay. These are friends, the CPS workers taking him because, he's in that stranger danger age. And it was horrifying. And we get to the Santa Cruz County jail and the sheriff takes me out of the car first. And there's sort of this, hallway between the outside world and when you go into the jail. And I was still crying the whole ride. Where are they taking my son? Is he going to be okay? What's happening? Can you tell me? And he grabbed my arm very hard and he said, squeezed up my upper arm really hard. And he said, you will never see your son again. You should not be anyone's mother.
Wow.
And in that moment, I 100% agreed with him. I mean, I believed him on the that I would never see my son again, and that I shouldn't be anyone's mother. In that moment, I just remember I just like dropped my head and I was like, oh my God, he's right. Like I should not be anyone's mother. And it was a horrible thing to say, right? It wasn't true. And it would take me a long time to know it wasn't true. But a few nights later, I remember being in jail. It was my first time in jail. And I was like, I just failed at life. Like everybody else has it figured out. I just failed. And I don't have the strength in me to get what's ahead of me. I, was charged with all these felonies. Bail was $250,000. Like I've imploded my life so big in such a huge nuclear explosion and hurt all this collateral damage and fallout. Like I don't have the spirit and strength or spark in me to get through whatever's ahead of me. I can't imagine not seeing my children ever again, which is what I thought. And so I decided in that moment in jail, I was like, you should probably trigger warning this for people, but I said, it would be better for my children to have a dead mother than a mother who's in prison. And so I decided to end my life. I wrote a note to my boys and said, I'm sorry and I love you and I hope addiction never gets a hold of you, and made plans to end my life. And it was such a peaceful decision for me in that moment. Like I can't even explain. It was like dark but quiet. And I was like, oh, this is the only way. Like I'm a pretty resilient person, and I didn't have any resilience in me at that moment, I thought.
Wow. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. Something, right?
Yeah. Thankfully, I was in my failure era, so I failed at that too. So thank goodness. Right.
Yeah.
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 But I tried it, I made all the preparations and then, what I think is miraculously, I was waiting for the guard checks to come every hour and everyone to fall asleep. And then miraculously, I fell asleep. I didn't sleep again, detox from opiates for a month. But that night, I fell asleep, and I, with not to be too graphic, but I had, a sheet, 6 knots around my neck, as tight and I fell asleep waiting for it to get quiet in there. And I didn't wake up until they were like scraping these, plastic chairs in and throwing the lights on at 5 a.m. for breakfast. And in that moment, I was embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, I don't want anyone to see, and I can't even get the knots off. I'm hiding under my blanket and trying to undo the knots. Not once thinking like, maybe I should ask for help. I was just like, oh, like what happened? Why didn't that happen? And luckily I was never in that dark place again. I got pulled an hour later into like emergency CPS court and got I heard where my son was, and, not like everything was, roses and flowers from that moment on, but luckily, gratefully, I was never in that dark place again.
Oh, thank God for that. Thank God for that. But how many days did you attempt that how many days in jail were you before you did that?
2.
Also right from the gate. Got it. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So in the heat of detox, in the heat of just knowing, all I'm getting information on is like, you're going to go to, you're charged with this many felonies. Your bail's this much. You're not going to see your children for 37 years. I was like, am I not going to see my children until they're like grown men? Like I couldn't fathom that. I couldn't fathom getting through that.
I'm sure. And I'm also assuming you're in a population that you normally don't mix with. And trying to figure that out. That must have been, can you walk the audience through that? Because that was that's a fascinating education that you had. Walk us through that.
Yeah. I mean, I had never been in jail before. I was, again, 16 years younger than I am now, but I was the oldest person in jail, I think, almost. My best friend in jail was a girl who was 19 and my oldest son was 17. It was a different world. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know the lingo. I didn't know the etiquette, and the women I was in jail with saved me. They really did save me. And I think people form a family in whatever circumstance or situation or environment they're in, if they're there long enough, right? So, nobody, I didn't have one friend from my PTA life or my book clubs or my soccer mom or coaching Little League who came to visit me in jail. And
Wow.
really the women in jail saved my life, and I was an anomaly to them. They're like, what are you doing? I was like, PTA club, like just, it was, they're like, who you repping? I'm like, Aptos. It's like a suburban cul-de-sac, so like, but everyone had humor about it, and they helped me kind of learn the ropes there's hierarchies and power structures like in the PTA or like in, whatever it is. And so, I've always, one of my childhood trauma responses, I'm really good at reading a room and reading people. And so I think that, that served me, as a lot of addicts are, right? That hypervigilance. And so, they told me what was happening in court. They told me what CPS meant. They told me, my S number, like you're given a number. And the guards didn't want to say my last name because it was Love. And so that was like too nice to yell out. So at first they're yelling out this number and I had no idea what my number was. And so, it was a culture shock. And a part of it was kind of nice also because it was insulated. There was so much craziness going on in the outside world. Obviously, like my community, my friends, like all this stuff that you're sort of insulated there. Like no one can reach you unless you call them collect. And so there's the introverted part of me kind of liked that a little bit, because I didn't have a lot of inner strength to deal with anything.
Yeah, and a lot of moms in jail.
80%
right?
of what
80%. That's the number, right?
Yeah, 80% of women in jail are mothers, and often of minor children.
And you got a copy, if I got this correct, of Eckhart Tolle's book and Mark Naples' book, right?
Yes. So, there wasn't a lot to read in there, but a woman who went off on the prison bus left behind The Power of Now, and so I just started reading it with the same desperation I did as a kid, right? Like just escape, let me read this book, and it saved my life. Both of those books did. I recently, just like a month ago, was teaching at Omega Institute in upstate New York, a writing retreat, and Mark Napo was teaching there the same exact weekend. Like, so I love true stories. Like you can't even make this up. And
oh my God.
And I got dropped off there by the director of the program in front of this cafe, and he's sitting right there on the table. And I look at him, and my mouth drops open. He stands up and he goes, "Lara, I've loved your book." Like he had read it. And so I got to have all these meals with him and just tell him how much he saved my life. That Book of Awakening is just an amazing book, which is jumping ahead. But Eckhart Tolle, I read it, and, I was spending all my sleepless nights, like we do, trying to like rewrite the past. Why didn't I do this? If only I'd done that. If only I'd done that. Why didn't I ask for help? Why did I ever take that one pill? Why didn't I, like all of the things, or worrying about the future, like, am I going to go to prison? Am I going to fight fires? Do I know how to fight fires? I'd rather fight fires. Like, am I going to never see my kids again? Am I ever going to get a job again? Like all of that anxiety and worry of the future and regret for the past, and Eckhart Tolle's book, Power Now, taught me to shut that all down. One sentence in his book where you just think to yourself, I wonder what my next thought will be. And I remember I was like, okay, I'll do this. It was written in the book. And I did that. And there was like a millisecond of peace. And I was like, oh. And then I would do it again. And I'd get like a little longer and a little longer. And then, jail and prison is a great place to learn to meditate. There's online courses do that for your listeners. But it really helped me to tame my own mind and my own fears and my own worries.
Beautiful. I mean, Mark's got that. That great quote that I love: "Pain pushes until vision pulls you."
Mm-hmm.
God, that's rich, right? Where does
Isn't
that hit you? Where does that hit you? I'm curious.
I mean, right in the heart, right? Like it just, when I read that, if I ever get a tattoo of words, it's going to be that, right? Like if I ever get I think because I remember thinking, God, I've let pain push me my whole entire life. It drove what I did. It drove who I married. It drove what work just like pain pushing, trying to like let it push me while I'm trying to outrun it. And then, it was that such like vision pulling, like, oh yeah, I could have a vision. Let me think about what my vision would be and let that pull me. And that's a powerful switch.
Mm-hmm. And you, because of good behavior, you got out earlier, correct?
I got out, it was about 10 months. I got out, and then I got out, they'd started a new work release program. So when I got out, 16 years ago yesterday, August 17th, I had to go back every day and like work outside the jail, which was fine because it was working outside the jail for a week or 10 days. I don't remember now, but it wasn't over for me.
You had a very public arrest. A lot of media, a lot of exposure, newspapers. Shame is a big part of your life, right? Mm-hmm. How did you deal with the shame? Talk to the audience about that.
When I was sentenced, my face was on the front page of the Santa Cruz Sentinel, the local paper. It said, Aptos neighbor from hell sentence, full color, my face in the courtroom. And then someone anonymously mailed me that in jail, that article, in case I didn't see it. I remember the next morning, the guard handing me the paper, like making sure I saw it, because otherwise I wouldn't have seen it. And there were all these online comments, and someone anonymously printed out like 350 comments, really hateful, hurtful, mean things. And some I could like decipher and see, I kind of figured out who the people were. And they mailed them to me anonymously with a fake name to the jail. And I just remember while I was incarcerated, just reading these comments over and over and over again. And something in that act of doing that for months, it just the shame just seeped in my bones. I was like, I am bad. Like, I am so bad. And redemption is for people who are good. Like, I believe in redemption. Like, and I did then, not for myself. Right.
Right.
But redemption is for good people who mess up. And I carried those comments and that headline around with me for, over a decade. I mean, not physically. After a couple of years, I got rid of just because a friend's like, can you throw those comments out? Like, stop reading them. But mentally and figuratively, I carried it around for, 11 years probably, where I lived in fear of people Googling me and seeing that headline, right? Like right now, if you Google me, it's still there, but you gotta go back like 5 or 6 good pages of things, right? Which is fair. I think that's fair. It's always going to be there, but the shame is insidious. It just seeps into everything, and it's really isolating, and I believe people heal in community, and shame is so isolating. One, you don't advocate for yourself when you're in shame, right? Like, you're not like, hey, that's unfair. You're just like, okay, what else? It was really hard. It took me a very long time to advocate for myself, or to think that I deserved to if something was unfair, that I could speak up. And, shame was like, I'm not post-jail. I wasn't going to make friends, right? Like, I'm trying to live my life with, that radical honesty, but I'm not gonna just tell you my whole background and then watch you run screaming from the room. Or, even, when I did eventually I got Caden back, my son back, and he, is in first grade, and you're at, back to school night, and another mom comes up to me. She's like, oh, hey, she didn't, Santa Cruz is kind of a big enough town that not everyone recognized me or was thinking about me as much as I thought they were. But she was like, oh, hey, my son loves your son. Like, maybe they could have a play date. I could drop him off at your house. And I was like, ugh. There's this crisis moment, because if you knew my past, you probably wouldn't want to drop your son at my house. But I'm not going to tell you. And so it's just really isolated. I couldn't make friends. It was also like my childhood, a period of profound loneliness with that shame.
Wow. I so get that. Let's talk. Where do you want to go about your life after jail? Let's kind of walk through that incredible journey. You started,
Yeah.
it was not just you walked out, everything was great, and I got these great, and I'm working with the Pope all of a sudden. Yeah, no, it didn't happen that way, did it? Yeah.
No, it didn't. It's interesting because in jail, every single woman who I watched leave jail, we had a little party for her, and she was full of good intentions. I'm gonna, break up with a drug dealer boyfriend. I'm gonna go back to school. I'm gonna reconnect with my family. I'm not gonna hang out with those friends. I'm gonna move the area. And then a week later, she'd come back in arrested. And because this was my first time in jail, I was like, and I'm not proud of this, but I remember thinking like, how could she be so stupid? Like, that's what I thought, right? Like, just
Sure.
full honesty. Like, when I leave, I'm never coming back here. Like I had this sort of righteousness, like, that's just crazy. Why would you, it's so bad in here. Like, why would you do that? And then when I got out of jail, thinking, and despite the 32 felonies, I'm kind of a rule follower. I was like, okay, I'll follow all the rules and I'll do all the things and I'll be done, and the court says I'll be done. And my Senate says I'll be done. And I didn't know then that you're actually never done. Like, I'm still not done today. There's not enough New York Times bestsellers I can write that will make some people think I have completely paid for my crimes or that I'm completely done. It pops up in all kinds of ways, even today. And I didn't know that there are times in trying to like rebuild a life and re-enter that I would be like, wow, I think I'm safer in jail. Like, it almost feels like it would be safer there. Because I think good people, not even good people, I think people ideologically believe in second chances. They believe in rehabilitation, but not enough to hire it, right? Not enough to let it move next door or rent to it. Not enough to befriend or let it in your book club or your game nights. And so there were all these obstacles and barriers that I had no idea about that were very illogical, right? And really just a setup to go back. Like, I had to check in 3 different courts who were monitoring my progress. They cared about me that much. And drug tests for 3 different agencies on any given day. So it's hard enough to get a job with a criminal record, much less get a job that on a moment's notice, up to 3 times a day, you can just leave that job to go drug test. And I had a car that didn't even go uphill. It was like a donated car. So it was really scary, all the ways you can go back to jail that have nothing to do with ever doing a drug again or committing a crime again, just transportation related, childcare related, logistics related, illogical bureaucracy related. And I had no idea about any of that until,
Wow. Did you ever come close to relapsing?
No. I did not come, I've never come close. Here's why. I mean, in the immediate after jail, I was still in this crisis mode, which is, sometimes it's very easy to stay clean in crisis. Because I was fighting against this clock to do all the requirements to get my son back before the year ran out and CPS could say I'm no longer his mother. So there's no part of me that was going to let that happen. But there's no part of me, even to this day, and I know this is not normal, and I relapsed. Like, in jail, I stopped, and then when I got on bail, I relapsed. And, a lot of people who've read the book had strong feelings. I was like, that's the reality. It's not just like, we skip off to happily ever after. But from the time I made that decision on March 18th, 2009, not to use drugs, it's been fairly, I mean, I feel guilty saying this, but there's no part of me that ever thinks like, oh, it wasn't so bad, even to this day. Like, oh, even though, like, I made a nice narrative out of it, but there's no part of me that's like, oh, it wasn't so bad. Maybe I can do some recreational heroin. Like, there's just no part of me. And more importantly than that, I have so many other coping skills now that it is not the thing that pops up like, oh, things are hard, I should do that. And I didn't have that my whole life, and I feel grateful for that because it's not normal, but it has been so far not the hardest, not even close to the hardest thing in my life since I walked out of there. And my, canary in the coal mine for that isn't going to come from like, oh, I have a craving to do a drug. It's not going to come from that. It's going to come from me pretending in any area of my life. It's going to come from me saying yes when I mean no. for me being in an unhappy relationship and not saying a word, me being miserable at work and not saying a word, like that kind of sort of internalized misery. So far, so good.
So far, thank God.
But we remain vigilant always, right?
Yes, we do. Listen, you've so many great lines. This line just is so. You say, as long as I'm sick as my secrets, well, then I'm in hospice. Fuck, what a line. What a line. When did you make the declaration, I can't live like that anymore? I need to start telling people really what I'm scared, I'm overwhelmed, I don't like myself. When did you say enough's enough with that? When did you hit bottom there?
It took a long time. I mean, it took a couple years to get work, and I got a job at a literary agency. And, what I was doing, I was in so much shame that what I was doing for a long time is building my resume of goodness, right? Like, and hiding my past. But I was like, I'm building a resume of goodness. Like, you know what? Nelson Mandela thanked me in his last book. So put that in the resume of goodness along with A Neighbor from Hell. It's like all these things. Archbishop Tutu said I have a heart of gold, like all of these things. I was working on these amazing books with like big people in the world, right? And building this resume of goodness. And I thought if I'm just good adjacent enough, when the truth comes, it's like two trains. Like here's the truth train. Like we all know the truth's always going to come out. Like I knew, I lived in fear of people Googling me. I was hiding my past. I was remaining isolated and disconnected from community because I didn't want people to know, and run screaming from the room was what I imagined. At the same time, so there's that train, and then there's the truth train, and then there's the train that was like, here's how I'm proving I'm good, be able to prove I'm good to the world. Here's how I'll be able to defend my humanity. Here's how I defend my badness with my goodness. So those things, I knew they were going to crash eventually. And first of all, it's exhausting and it's heavy, and there's no room for creativity when you're in shame, right? When you're in like survival mode at all time, like who's going to find out? Who's going to, what problem am I going to have to deal with? And so it was over 11 years, and I was working with I was working with a Secret Service agent writing her book, and she's talking about all the bad guys, and I'm writing it, but I'm like, I'm the bad guy. She doesn't know, it's like horrible. To keep that secret. And so I finally, I had a friend in Santa Cruz who like curated the local TEDx talks, and for a few years, I'd known her for a long time. So for a few years, every year she'd be like, you want to give a talk, tell your story? I was like, absolutely not. Like I would rather have all my teeth pulled with no Novocaine, like no way. I mean, year after year. And then finally in 2019, she came, thank goodness, Irene is her name, and she came to my literary agency where I worked, and she said, I'm not leaving here till you say yes. The TED Talks are in like 4 days. And I was like, I'm not going to say yes. She stayed for like almost 4 hours. And finally I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And
wow.
I quit. And I got up on that stage, and I had, like 2 days to, write out 15 minutes and then memorize it because there's no notes. And I got up there and I said, basically my biggest secret, my biggest fear, I showed that headline as like, I was once a neighbor from hell. And now I'm going to tell you about some other people I've been, and talked about my work, and I talked about shame. And, when we just label people by the worst version of themselves. And I, like no one was doing that to me more than me, right? I'd built a whole identity out of that headline, and a whole identity out of my shame, and a whole identity out of the worst season of my life. And so that was really, like the feeling I had when that talk was over. One, I got a standing ovation, which felt really good, right? Like telling my secrets, people didn't run screaming from the room. But the feeling I had like in my body and in my soul after I just told truth was better than any drug I have ever taken, honestly.
Right on.
It was like, oh, okay. Like, and then I was like, I want more of that. And that's really the only reason I decided to do the book. I was like, maybe this will help. And there's a lot more story to tell. And so that was the moment after that talk at the end of, beginning of 2020, where I was like, okay, well, maybe I will do a book.
Wow. Before we talk about your book, which of course we're going to talk about, how did Desmond Tutu, the Pope, the Dalai Lama come into your consciousness? I mean, how did that happen?
Yeah. crazy. So I was, I was with Kate and my youngest son, Caden. We're in like 400 square foot apartment. For 2 years, I've been trying to get a job, trying to do work and trying to get hired and survive and meet all my probation requirements. And I saw a Craigslist ad for a part-time personal assistant, 5 hours a week for a literary agency. And, one of the gifts, reading and writing was my thing. And when I started doing drugs, like I never wrote again. I never wrote again until I stopped doing drugs in jail. Like those two things, like no offense to like Charles Bukowski and all the Hemingway and all those great, writers. But to me, writing was how I made sense of the world. Is how I made sense of my inner life, which sounds like a lot of angsty. But yeah, you've read the book, so there's a little bit of that. But really, it's how I understood things and my place in the world and handled pain. And so, without using the drugs for pain, I turned back to writing. And I started ghostwriting in jail. I was writing letters as the other women to the judge, and I'd hear their stories, and then I'd write a letter as if I were them, for them, to the judge to get treatment instead of prison or to get a pass for something. And, I broke up with a lot of people. I seduced some people. Like, I was great. I was like, oh, I'm pretty good at this thing. I didn't know ghostwriting, but I was good at being other people. And so when I started working this literary agency, it was $20 an hour. I thought my ship had come in. I was like, this is the answer. And it was a very long questionnaire for a part-time 5-hour week. There's probably 26 questions. I had to answer essay questions. And one of them was on like integrity, which is, again, I'm going to be honest, but I had a don't ask, don't tell policy. Like if you ask me, I'll tell you, but I'm not going to volunteer it. Right. And so, I was like, integrity to me means like I keep my word. Like I show up when I say I'm going to show up. And so I was on paper overqualified for the job. He didn't do a background check. He didn't, I had the privilege of that not being the first thing people thought when they look at me, right? So luckily I had a chance. So I went to work. He represented Desmond Tutu. And when I saw the ad, I was like, who's advertising on Craigslist that represents Desmond Tutu? Like, I'll probably get murdered, but it seems like a good risk to take at this stage. I was trying to survive. And so I interviewed with him. He hired me and I started working on books. And like, this was my first love. I was like, oh, this is a gift, because I'd been a real estate agent. I'd owned a pet cemetery. I'd done bookkeeping. Like I'd done a million different careers and jobs, but this was who I am. This is my first love. I always wanted to write books since, it's what I went to graduate school for long before this happened, in creative writing. So I started working for him and he just trusted me blindly first, just 100% trust. And because he did, I would have never in a million years done one thing to betray his trust. Like I believe, especially with people who've been written off, who've lost everything, been marginalized, like they will 100% rise to the level that people believe in them. Because to me, it felt so good to have someone trust me that I would never break that trust. He used to give me receipts from his wallet and there'd be like a dollar bill mixed in there. And I'd be like, is this a test? Are there cameras? And I'd put it on did you get your dollar? And he was like, why are you freaking out about a dollar? But it was so important to me. And he didn't Google me. So I had about 3 weeks of working there and I started actually collaborative writing, like ghostwriting with one of the authors because I had that in my background. It wasn't what I was hired for. And I remember it was Doug Abrams is the person who hired me, and he called me brilliant, right? And I was like, oh, that felt so good. And then 2 days later, we worked with there's this book called What Color is Your Parachute? We were representing it, working on the next edition. And he was in the office on the phone, and the guy's like, I guess had said to him, people just Google their employees now, there's no like reference checks. And I think Doug was just on the computer and kind of spaced out. So he Googled me. And I'm sitting across the room and he saw that headline and his face went sheet white. And he was like, hung up and he was just like, I didn't check your references. And I did. And, and I was like, oh, my dream is dead. Like this is just another obstacle. And he's like, why don't you go and come back tomorrow? And I left and I was like, I'm never coming back here. I'm never coming back. And I called some friends and I did come back and I had my speech prepared because I didn't sleep that night. And I said, look, it's really important to me that I didn't lie to you. And I'm sorry that I put you in this position, but I'm just as brilliant today as you thought I was yesterday. Oof. Before you read that headline. And And he ended up keeping me on. He's like, maybe you don't handle the finances, which is fine. I mean, eventually I became CFO, but I was there for when I left 12 years later to start my own agency. It was the number one boutique nonfiction literary agency in the world. We had 19 New York Times bestsellers, and I was CEO from part-time assistant. So, like, I was determined not to let him down just because he believed in me enough to give me a chance. That's all. That's all I needed.
Wow. But what gave you the strength to advocate for yourself that day and just and go up and show up for yourself as opposed to this is my lot in life. They found me out. I am a bad person. How'd you do that? I love that, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't automatic. It was a long, one of those long sleepless nights of the soul because I left there and I was like, I was so embarrassed and ashamed and just like disheartened, and this is always going to be the way it is. I said, I'm never going back. Like, I once married someone because I didn't like conflict and didn't want to say no. Right. Like, so conflict.
A lot of people do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, me and conflict, we didn't, it wasn't my favorite thing. I didn't go seeking it out and I ran from it. Right. Pain pushes. And so, but my, I had such good feelings of feeling so valuable for the few weeks before this happened. And I knew I was doing good work. And luckily I'd gotten a chance to prove my work ethic and my creativity and my brilliance, right? And with someone who didn't already pre-label and prejudge me like we do with people, right? Or stereotype it. And so, yeah, again, it's one of those things like I don't remember the conscious choice, like I'm gonna fight for myself. It was just like, I want this and I'm just going to go. And I wanted resolution. He's such a good human, such like a good, trusting, naive human, like he just believes the world's good. But, luckily we were working with Desmond Tutu. And when I got there, Doug said, look, I can't, Desmond Tutu did the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, helped people forgive. He's the beacon of forgiveness. And Doug's like, I can't work with Desmond Tutu and not walk my talk. And so luckily it was a combination of me being brave enough to go back and him being brave enough to walk his talk and live to his ideals. And we're great friends today. I just had a big conversation with him yesterday, but we did a lot of great work together, like Just Mercy with Brian Stevenson. And the first book that I fully like collaborated on to ghostwrite was Desmond Tutu's Book of Forgiving. And, I was like, I can't write this book. I don't know how to forgive myself. I'm great at forgiving other people. And so, looking back now, I can see, like you can trace the patterns looking back. It's so much easier to rear view mirror things, but I can see what I learned those 11 years before I got on that stage and told the truth, like what I was picking up from each book I was working on, each author. I was working with neuroscientists, like neuroplasticity, like what messages am I telling myself every day? Desmond Tutu about forgiveness and relationship experts and spiritual leaders and the Dalai Lama, who's, he's not a super judgy guy, so it was, it was amazing. But what felt really good is I knew I was doing good in the world. Like I was doing good work. And I was building that resume of goodness to defend my existence and my humanity and my soul really. And until I didn't need to do that anymore, right? Till I was like, you know what? I actually don't need to defend. It took a long time. I get a lot of messages from women who are sort of gone through similar things, but they're at the beginning stages where I was, maybe a couple years out. And I'm just like, do not take 11 years to forgive yourself. Do not spend 11 years in shame because it's paralyzing.
Yeah. So before we get into your book, let's just move into the forgiveness track. And the audiences want to know, how are your children? What was that like? How did you build the trust up? And how did you, because you've talked numerous times about the pain of what you went through and the kids and what they went through. Could you walk us through that, please?
Yeah. So my, my older boys got to come visit me in jail, and they did on the weekends. And, luckily, my boys had a really strong foundation of feeling very loved by me, even as I was struggling with addiction, and they didn't know. they had a strong foundation. Like I'm 100% biased, but they're like amazing humans. They're compassionate, they're kind, they're smart, they're funny, they're like good friends. They just wanted me to be okay, right? Like they forgave me instantly. They just wanted me to be okay. Now, trusting, my oldest son, Dylan, he said, Mom, forgiveness is automatic, but trust is like, that's going to take some time. They just wanted to know I was going to be okay. And because my story of learning things the hard way is their college essay topic, right? Like, that's my regret. Like, I know that I'm someone who kind of has to be a little extra and learn things really the hard way. And my regret isn't that that's what I needed. It's that the collateral damage that became their story of resilience, right? So, they were, my son, he was a senior in high school while I was incarcerated. So right after I got out, he was going off to college at Cal Poly in California. And it was about, maybe he was in school 4 months, and he called me, 5 months. He called me, said, Mom, Dad keeps losing my mail, and you're the only adult I can trust in my life. I'm going to have all my mail for you. And it was just such a little thing, but like I felt like more proud of that than like, it's a New York Times bestseller. Like, just that moment. It was just like those little moments where people are believing in you again. Like just like with Doug saying, just those, I can't like emphasize how important that is to feel when you've been devalued and devalued yourself, to feel like valuable to someone again. And I managed that mail for so well, right? Like, so my boys were really forgiving when I got out. It was embarrassing for them. My son Ty, when he was in junior high, when my face was on the paper, he said, Mom, every single classroom I went in junior high had that paper on the desk, the front page, your picture. But luckily they're strong and resilient, and we have a sense of humor in our family, and all three graduated college. 2 got married last year. They're all like, Caden, my youngest, is at UC San Diego, and he's here right now. I actually sent him we're flying back to California. I sent him to the gym because I was like, there's no 20-year-old boy who's going to stay quiet during a podcast, but he's 20 now,
Yeah.
Oh, wow. He's like, Mom, do we have protein? That's all I care. So I just like, go to the gym, come back in an hour and a half. But they're amazing. And here's the thing, my experience made me a much better mother. It made me a much better parent because I was real. Because there was nothing that my boys couldn't talk to me about in high school, in junior high, in college. It was like, even their friends, I was the adult they could tell all their secrets to, and this is before a book. Since my book came out, like, there's a lot of people telling me their secrets, right? Like, in the world. But I wasn't I was just more real. I was like, let's just talk about real things. Let's talk about what really matters. Like, it was a gift. Because before that, I remember Stanford was the only school I didn't get into. And so in my, like as parents do, I was like, oh, my boys have to go to Stanford. That's the most important thing. And then right pre-jail, and then living the suburban cul-de-sac life at post-jail, is like, they need to do what they love. They need to be happy. That's the most important thing. So it was like a real shift. It was a real gift, I think, in me as a mother, made me a better parent and friend and a better listener and a better empathizer.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. And God bless your children, and they're all safe and loving their mom. And a lot. It's bravo to you. Bravo to you. Now, the book. Did, like, your friend who helped you, push you to do the TED Talk, did somebody have to do that? Or did you wake up one day and said, it's fucking time for me to tell my story?
No, honestly, I walked out after doing that TED Talk, and Doug was in the audience. I walked into the hallway, and he just looks at me, and he's like, yeah, it's time to write that book proposal. It's time. And I always writing a book has been my dream since I was a kid. I didn't know it'd be this book, right? I thought it'd be like the great American novel. My writing is in my education's in fiction writing. But I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I wrote the book proposal, and the thing is, like, I hadn't told any of those stories. Like, first of all, no one asked me. And if they had asked me any stories about jail or anything, I wasn't like, hey, let me tell you about it. I was in so much shame. I was hiding it all. And one of the things with writing the book is, like, I didn't realize how much I needed to tell those stories. Like, I didn't realize, like, how much I was carrying, and a memoir, you're picking your scenes to fit your themes and your threads. So, there's been some book clubs that are like, oh, that sounds fun in jail. I'm like, no, don't go. I didn't tell all the stories, and yeah, it's not that. But so I wrote the book proposal, and then we're a nonfiction literary agent, so Doug represented me as an agent because you can't agent yourself, right? It's like a therapist needs a therapist, and an agent. Even if I'm a literary agent, I need an agent, and so the book sold. It sold at auction. There were 8 editors bidding on it, and it was crazy because these are editors I've worked with. They didn't know my story, and they're like, I didn't know that about Lara. How great. Like all my fears are like, and so Simon & Schuster, it went to Simon & Schuster. And then, in nonfiction books, you don't write the book first. And so I had a year to write the actual manuscript before it was going to be due. And I was like, okay, well, the only way I'm going to do this is I'm going to be really, really honest. And I went away for 2 months to write the first draft of the book. I went to Thailand. I'd always wanted to go to Thailand by myself, to Koh Samui, Thailand, because I had to be away from my family. If I was going to be really, really honest, I had to be away from work. There was like a small window with a time difference where people could reach me. And I wrote the whole first draft of the book in like 7 weeks. I just set a random deadline for myself. And there's things in the book that were not in my book proposal that I had never told anyone, like all the stuff that happened when I was out on bail, that I hadn't told my agent, that I hadn't told my editor, that they didn't know they were buying. And so, but I was like, I got to get really honest. Like, I can't think about how people are going to react. Like, I just have to think it's going to do some good. And I can't, because when you can, have a lot of practice rearranging 26 letters and you're kind of good at writing, like, I could have hustled honesty, right? I could have like razzle dazzled the words, and some people, not everyone, right? But some people were like, wow, that's such a brave and honest book. But some people would have known I was hustling. And so I was like, I'm only doing this if I could be really, really honest. And so that's what I did. And then, the book, it's a 2-year process from the time you sell a book to when it comes out in the store. So, it has a whole year in production, and they're planning the launch. And it was about 3 weeks before the book was about to come out. And I had this moment, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I was too honest. Like, I went into panic, right? All that shame came back that I supposedly I've healed, it all just came back. And I was like, what have I done? That feeling like like those dreams where you're like naked in front of the math class, or, or you're, or that feeling when you're like eating too much cotton candy. I was just like, felt sick. I was like, oh no, this is not going to go. I was just terrified. And, the reaction, but people did not run screaming from the room, with my honesty and my, my messy inner world. And, I had to let my boys read it, and I let them all read it before. They're the only ones I would have changed something for. So you have to tell the truth in a nonfiction book, and you can change the names of anyone who wants their name changed. They didn't want their names changed. Did my ex-husband's for some reason, but I let them read it, and my oldest son, Dylan, said, Mom, I've always felt close to you, and now I feel closer. And the hardest was to let Caden read it, because, he didn't know a lot of the detail. He knew the story, but not the details. And there's a lot of stuff about his dad that he didn't know that was in there. So, and I wanted, I let his dad read it early just so he would know what Caden was reading. But Caden, he was 18, senior year in high school. It was winter break. The book was going in production in January. I was like, okay. He'd been asking. I was so scared to let him read it. And so he read it, and, he was reading it all night. And he's not a big reader. He's a gamer. And so I was like, what part are you on? What's happening? I kept going in there. His room. He locked him out of his room. He's like, well, talk about it tomorrow. Let me read it. And so he read the whole thing straight through. And I get a text from him at like midnight because I wasn't sleeping. I was really scared. And he said, Mom, there's a big problem at the end. And I was like, what? And he's like, there's a typo. And I was like, oh my God, it hasn't gone to copy editing, And then he's like, you should pay me for finding that typo. Like, he's an 18-year-old boy, right? And then he came in my office the next morning, and he said, I didn't know any of that. He's like, it was like watching a movie. And then he said, like, he was unfazed though, in a way. Like, he's like, there were some boring parts. And I was like, what? And he's like, what parts I wasn't in? Again, 18-year-old boy. Like, it was that, like, I think it gave him more context to a story that he vaguely has memories from, but mostly is heard, so it gave context. And I think, that's what I love about memoir. Like when you're in the first person consciousness of someone, like you're making those choices with them. And I purposely have the book in the present tense, right? So if you're reading this, you are me. And we're doing this messy stuff together. And we're making our bad decisions. We're making our good decisions. But I think that's how you hack empathy. I think that's how you like really understand. Like there's nothing else that gets you so close in someone's head. Like you can't watch a video and be in someone's head. You can't watch, So I think it helped to have context. And, I've gotten like a lot of people have said, my family member's struggling, but I have a little more empathy. Or I lost my mom, but I think I know a little bit more what they're going through. And it's hard for people to reconcile. Like at any point in my addiction, I would have thrown myself in front of a train to save any one of my children or any one of your children or anybody's children. I couldn't stop using drugs for them.
Right.
And that's so hard to reconcile, right? And then as a mom, we're already got shame as a mom. We're already not making the organic things, or as a dad, it's like we're always like questioning our parenting. And so this is like that on steroids, right? Like this sort of guilt and shame. I'm so far from the perfect mother. But I think I've the only thing I've done perfectly is make my children feel loved, despite all of the scenes you read about, and so I'm proud of that. It's the one thing I've done well.
That's beautiful. Well done. Bravo to you, Mom. Let me ask you this. The book becomes a huge success. Miss Winfrey calls you up. She shouts you out. Did you have a moment once you realized, oh gosh, was it like, were you proud of yourself? Were you able to love the little girl in you? Or walk us through that, because I was crying. I mean, I was crying for you.
Yeah. I mean, every writer wants that, right? And I co-authored a book called The Sun Does Shine with Anthony Ray Hinton in 2018. And not as a ghostwriter, but as a co-author, where you're on the cover with them. And Oprah had picked that book. So I'd been Oprah adjacent, right? And so that was the dream. I didn't think she could pick my book because she's a scene. That 2018 scene is in my book. And I was like, she's not going to be able to do that. And normally she picks books, right before they publish. So like when the book publishes, it's an Oprah book. So I remember just talking about manifesting that you said earlier.
Yes.
So I was, it was like my book had been out for 6 months and it was doing well. And Simon Schuster like sent me on a big tour, and, word of mouth was great, and Goodreads awards and, Apple Books awards, but not Oprah awards. And so I remember I was kind of wallowing about that. And I allow myself sometimes max 2 days to wallow. I put on really sad music and I dive in. And so I was wallowing. It was between Christmas and New Year's and the kids were gone. I was like, oh, am I just better at being other people in books than me? Because I'd written 5 New York Times bestsellers as other people, right? And Oprah had picked a book as someone else. Am I better at being someone else than me? And I did the wallowing thing. And like, what if I'm letting people, I just like, I dove in. My brain could get messy if I'm not vigilant, right? And then I was like, okay, enough of that. Now I need to imagine Oprah Winfrey picking my book. It was December. I was like, Oprah Winfrey's going to pick it. She's going to do it. I just like had this, Oprah fantasy. And I whether it's manifesting or daydreaming or delulu thinking, or, I have scripts that go in my head. I do it sometimes. I fall asleep and I imagine conversations. So January comes around. It's like 3 weeks into January, and Simon Schuster, my publicist from there, was like, hey, can you hop on a Zoom, talk about the paperback, which is really a long ways off. Paperback comes out a year later. And I thought that was weird. And we get on this Zoom and she's like, I've been thinking about reaching out to book clubs. Is there anyone you want? And I was, this is my day job as a literary. I was like, well, and they did the Zoom on Riverside. And I was like, that's weird, right? She's like, Simon Schuster's using Riverside now. I'm like, no, they're not. I just had a meeting there. It was just like a weird, I didn't know what was going on. And I assumed the worst, of course. I was like, oh, they're going to cancel the, like whatever disasters I can catastrophize with the best of them. But she's like, are there any book club you want in particular? And I was like, well, which ones have you reached out? We did this back and forth. And I was like, well, which one I want. And then Oprah pops up on the Zoom. And she says, which one, Lara? And like, I go, there's like YouTube video of this somewhere out there. And I go blank because I didn't know if it was my delusional thinking or real life in that moment. And she said, you're my next book pick. And she said, this is a full circle moment, isn't it? And she said, I am just the vessel for you now. And she said that she had been doing book clubs secretly, no publicity, no one knew about it, in the largest women's prison in the world, which is in Chowchilla, California, for 2 years. So this was a subject she cared about, no publicity around it. And she said, you know, Lara, in December, I found your book in my living room in Maui, and nobody knows how it got there. I asked every one of my, because there's a whole process with, you have to go through the editorial director, and, you know, an author can't send their book to Oprah, it has to go through publicists and publisher. She goes, I asked every single person on my staff, no one knows how that book got there. And I picked it up. I didn't even realize I'd met you before. I just started reading. I couldn't put it down. And it's the next book club hit. And so it became this big mystery. They're talking about CBS News, like, how did the book get there? And I started, like, the old me I was like, felt guilty. Like, I swear, like, it sounded like maybe I broke in. I was like, I don't know how it got there either, you know, but it was this thing, which was just, you know, like these crazy synchronicities in life. Like the time that I was wallowing and then just trying to let vision pull instead of pain push. She was coincidentally finding my book in her coffee table magically. And so, you know, and then once Oprah shines the spotlight, like everything changes. It was like a whole new book launch, you know, and it was like traveling for a year and just this amazing opportunity. And then she and I went, you know, we did the book announcement happened, but she and I went into Chowchilla and did book club together. Like Simon Schuster donated like 800 books. The warden there allowed hardback books for the first time. They did the first correction officers inmate book club with my book and the hardback. I've gone in there 3 times, but she and I went in there, and I didn't know how the women were going to react. Like, first of all, they don't know I'm coming. It's not like, you know, it's not like everyone's on a group chat, right? They know Oprah's coming. And I didn't know, you know, I didn't know if I would be considered like, oh, who's this woman? Why is she getting this attention? And you know what? She snitched on a lot of things in that book. You know, like I had no idea.
Sure.
What the reaction would be. And so I was kind of hanging back, and Oprah walks in, and there's about 150 women and, you know, all the staff in this big cafeteria in Chowchilla. And Oprah has the mic, and all of a sudden she goes, Mama Love is here. And I was like just walking, and all of the women stood up and started screaming and crying and yelling.
Oh.
And I started crying. And here's the thing that I'm most proud of my book. It's not Oprah or all the things. It's the fact that those women told me, and it was the best. I've gone back 3 times in there. I get teary-eyed. But those women felt seen in that book. And somehow the women in Chowchilla are feeling seen in my book. And all of the book clubs in all the states, those women who are living entirely different lives, middle-class lives, are feeling seen in my book. And I was like, I don't know how I pulled that off, but that feels pretty good, right? To bridge those things. So yeah, that was one of my proudest moments.
Mama Love is here. Wow. Do you have a daily spiritual practice?
You know what? I'm reading Mark Nepo's book again because I had him sign it when I saw him. So I'm doing that again. I want to like tell you and your listeners that I meditate every day, but I don't, but I try to when I remember. My new spiritual practice right now, because I'm living in Hawaii, is I go at 5:45 in the morning to the beach, Monday through Friday. I meet a group of people. We get in outrigger canoes, and we paddle out a couple miles right as the sun is coming up over Hualalai, the mountain behind me. And there's chanting and prayers at the sunrise every single morning. And that is my current spiritual practice. Like nothing like it being out on the ocean. And, you know, when I was in jail, there's a woman who had a postcard of Hawaii. And I've always loved Hawaii. You know, since I was 21, I wanted to live here. And she had a postcard of Hawaii. I remember the guard ripping it up, but I remember being in jail 16 years ago and looking at that postcard and saying, I will never go there again. I will never be able to go somewhere beautiful like that again. Like there's no way I'm going to rebuild my life enough that I could ever like have that place. And so I am so happy. You know, I'm here, I'm writing a novel, I'm writing my first novel. So I came to Hawaii and,
yes.
And, you know, I still have Delulu plans because I don't ever, you know, I believe in big magical thinking and plans and goals. So, yeah, that's my big spiritual practice right now, you know. And one of the things coming here, I was like, am I going to find community? Am I going to make friends? And I know how to do that now. So it's been pretty cool.
Yes, you do. Let me ask you this. What has been your biggest defect of character you've had to overcome?
Fear of the unknown. Right?
How'd you
Right.
do that? What's your technique? Tell our audience how you did that.
No, you know what? I catch myself when I'm doing it. Like as someone who likes to try to script out everybody's motives and script out everything. I'm sort of in this like unhoused, untethered time in my life, which is so uncomfortable and so wonderful at the same time. Like not knowing what I'm gonna do next or where I'm gonna go next. And that is just not how I've operated. So, I fear of the unknown, how do I do that? One, I catch myself when I'm in the fear, but also I think I just trust that everything's happening for me, not to me now. That's the difference, right?
Right on. Oh, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Oh, I love that. All right. So I end a lot of times. I just want to do I'm just going to ask you, we'll do like some rapid fire thing. I'll ask you a question. You just quick response. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. First one. One word that best describes your journey.
Messy.
Right on. If you could send one message to your younger self behind bars, what would it be?
Ask for help. Don't be afraid to connect with people.
What's the book that changed your life the most?
The Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo.
Right on. What's your go-to mantra when life gets heavy?
Someday I'll look forward to looking back. Someday, yeah. I just say I look forward to looking back on this someday. That's how I know that I'll get through
it. Who's been your greatest teacher?
Anthony Ray Hinton, man who was on death row in Alabama for 30 years, my greatest spiritual teacher.
Wow.
Read The Sun Does Shine. Yeah.
Wait, I cut you off. What's the book that everybody needs to read?
It's The Sun Does Shine. He taught me more about gratitude and forgiveness than no offense to the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, but Anthony Ray Hinton is my greatest spiritual teacher.
If love had a sound, what would it be?
Just be a big sigh. A big, restful sigh.
Oh, I love it. What does freedom mean to you today?
Freedom today means responsibility.
What's one truth you wish the world knew about people in recovery?
That they are exactly like you.
Oof. I want to thank you for not only being my guest, but my sober sister. I've been blessed to have I've been sober 38 years. I got the gift at 22. So it's nice to walk this path with you. Thank you for inspiring me. Thank you for inspiring our audience. And I just can't wait to see what the next chapter is for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love talking to you.
The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarland, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Cornelek. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.